Yes, there we go. So welcome everyone and welcome Joost. We're really excited to have you here, and there's a ton of questions about your lessons about the seaweed company. So we'll do it a little bit different this time because there was so many questions. We thought, okay, let's see if we can get through them all or in some way. So Joost has the questions and we've kind of organized them by topic. So I'm just gonna let him go ahead and cover as much as we can. And as always, you can add some comments or extra questions in the chat. And yeah, I'd say let's get started. Welcome, Joost.
All right, okie doke. Well, let's give it a start then. First of all, really thank you all for all your questions. For me, it's also always good to reflect and to see if we have thought about everything. And I've seen some very inspiring and obvious questions as well. So what we decided is indeed what Inge just told, is that I tried to group them. And so in the answer, I try to give an answer to several questions at the same time. So I will not go line by line because we have over 50 questions and then it will become a kind of a boring part. So the first topic that I would like to discuss is all the questions about the market. Like where are our clients from, what kind of products have we developed, and all that kind of questions. So right now the seaweed company is focusing on basically on selling products to other businesses, so business to business. And the reason we do that is because the volumes of seaweed at the moment are not big enough yet, and we are developing things like fertilizer or animal feed supplements, and that require the businesses in between to tackle. So that is the products and the buyers that we have at the moment. And what we try to do for each of those segments is to make custom-made products in a way. So we formulate them so it fits the right animal or it fits the soil. What we do see, one of the questions was, do we see a change in mentality? Is that especially now, I think, but over the last year, 2 years, we see that the awareness of seaweed is extremely growing. And especially, I think, after this interesting period we have, or where we're still in, I think that the world is waking up towards more higher awareness towards immunity and resilience. And seaweed can play a fantastic role in that. So we see a lot of our products and our propositions being directed in that way to help the gut health and therefore immune systems of human beings, of animals, but also about of the soil. And I will tell a little bit later about that, a little bit more about that later. One of there's some questions about why are there not so many seaweed farmers, and why is that? Well, the main reason is that, there's not one reason, but there are a couple of things. You see most seaweed is growing in Asia. And someone asked, okay, if 95% comes out of Asia, why do you grow in Ireland? Well, exactly for that reason, because everything is currently grown in Asia. And in the other part of the world, there's hardly any cultivated seaweed available. And that's a pity because there are so many valuable applications for seaweed. But there's also a lot unknown yet. So about cultivation, there's still a lack of knowledge about what species can we cultivate and how to do that. So there's a technical barrier. Of course, if you go into the sea, everything becomes more expensive than if you would do that on land. So a financial barrier is there. And then I think, but luckily when I see this whole group here, sometimes I say it also lacks enough crazy people that are just focused enough to start and pioneering. But luckily I see here about more than over 20 crazy people, 21 so to say. So I think that problem is solved. All right. let's see if I can scroll down here. I can't scroll down. Oh, yeah. Then there were some questions about the topic of the business model. So someone asks, the seaweed company exists now over 2 years. Is it already financially profitable? No, we are not yet financially profitable. We are still living from borrowed money. In our business plan, we anticipated that we would have earned already by now quite some, well, substantial amount of money. But unfortunately, due to Corona, our harvest in Ireland has to be written off. We couldn't go there, we couldn't travel, we couldn't design our machinery, so we have lost that harvest. So that will be postponed by a year. So over next year, we expect to generate enough turnover to pay for all the operational expenses, the current operational expenses, and also to start paying back the loans. And all the new projects that we start will have to be financed separately. Then there was a very, let's say, interesting question, I would say, like, what do you think our group of young, individual, and idealistic restorers can learn from the big corporations like the ones you have worked for in the past, like Procter & Gamble and PepsiCo? And I think that if you like it or not, but those big corporations, they do something that works if you look at the scale and the mass they produce. And that is how I would like to look at them. Because and at the same time I'm looking at 3 screens and at my questions, because they do something that works. So one thing that we can learn from them is they bring in expertise. So they really make sure that the products they produce are working, are premium. They do what they say. So there's a kind of expertise. Then, of course, there is a financial buffer or financial, let's say, situation that those bigger corporations have. But another one, and that might be an interesting one for us, is they are also very good in, let's say, selling and marketing their proposition. And that is what I personally have learned when I started working for Pepsi-Cola and Procter & Gamble. So I learned how to sell products. But at one point I realized those are basically great skills, but it's up to me where I would like to use them for. And if I sell our proposition with Seaweed Company, then I'm using the same skills, but I have the feeling that it contributes more to a better world. But we need to become, let's say, good in selling, and also playing, let's say, the system, adapt to the systems like capital, etc., that are there in that system. If we fight that, then we not necessarily create the speed and the skill that we need. And I think that's very much possible even without giving up our ideals. There has been a question about how much has been invested so far. Well, I can't go into numbers, but more importantly is we have looked into different ways of financing. We didn't want to be reliable of one person or one venture capitalist, for instance, because that feels too vulnerable. We have been very selective with the people who wanted to invest in our company. And I've had many conversations and calls with people, and I even said no. I turned down quite some money of people that wanted to invest, but I had the feeling they were morely interested in the financial returns on the short term. And I said, no, right now when we start, we need people with money that know that this is a long-term journey. This is not something with a payout time of 2 or 3 years. So I stayed away of venture capitalists, of incubators, because I don't trust those guys. They're only out to invest in a lot of potential successful companies, and if 1 out of 10 is successful, then they have all that money back. But I don't like that attitude. So we have been very, very selective. That would be my lesson. Okay, I'll take a little break. Are there any questions in between, Inge, that we should or could ask?
I only saw Peter make a comment about your earlier
Yeah, we
point.
should learn not to be afraid to invest in marketing. That's the one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a good one. I mean, what we saw with the seaweed operation is that, of course, the first pioneers in these kind of industries are the really idealistic people, I would say. But those people, although they are right, they are not always, let's say, given, how do you say that, or acknowledged to be right, because the current system finds it very difficult to change the mindset. So you need to find a way to create that listening, so you can be against everything, etc. But if that doesn't move something, then you might not get to what you want to achieve. So I think in marketing or sales, and you see how I talk about that. I don't like them to be skills. It is more being open to, if am I am a stand for something. How do I get that message abroad? And sometimes marketing skills or marketing activities can take a role there. Yeah.
Yeah, I see a question from Gio. If you've considered going public with your company, or yeah, potentially.
Ooh, good question. No, not at all. And that is, some investors find it a little bit scary, because we said, no, we're not here to exit or to sell it, or we are here for the long term. But we do have a kind of vision there. So we think that in 10 years time, seaweed is big. It has to be, almost. If you look at the proteins and the fibers and the carbs that are in seaweed, then if we want to not only use and waste our land, but also make use of the sea as a source for growing seaweed, then I think seaweed will become big in a sustainable way. We need to learn from what we have done wrong on land. But I think in 10 years time, it will become bigger. It will probably become maybe more operational, or if you want to call it, more commodity. Well, that's the time that we would like to step out. We really like now these coming 10 years being a pioneer, starting an industry, talking to a lot of people from different perspectives, NGOs and governments and colleagues and industries, to start up activities. And that's the fun we see, to really start that up. That gives a lot of energy. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, there is some comments in the chat. Yeah, from Nadia. Do you think the message comes across more effectively if regenerative businesses share a part of their profit to other good causes?
Yeah, I think the new type of we call that, we want to create a business that is, let's say, that fits the 21st century. And I think that those kind of mechanisms are part of it. Like, how do we deal with our people? How do we deal with the societies we are part of? How do we deal with sharing profit to other good causes? And I think that is, although we don't have, it would be not fair to say we have that all installed. We know that these kind of principles are part of a 21st century business. At the same time, we also need to prioritize right now. So right now we are really focusing on how to validate our processes. How can we grow seaweed at the first time? Because if we would turn that around, I'm afraid that we won't get there. And then in the end, 1 or 2 or 3 or 5% of zero is still zero. And I think the world has more benefit if things could become, have a bit of scale. But we do have this in our ideas, how we deal with everyone, and we will adjust that and implement that as soon as things are possible. Is the investment in seaweed very expensive? Yes, it's very expensive. It is very expensive, and because of what I just said, you're walking in the sea, and in the sea everything breaks. You're walking with salt and with wind and with waves and with current. Everything breaks. If you paint something, it is rusted the next week or the next month. But it needs to withstand very tough forces. So that makes it not easy to step into. That is definitely one of the reasons. Okay. Let's go to another topic. One of the topics we mentioned was ecology. So quite some questions about ecology. Let's go into there. So Camilla asked, like, can you grow seaweed in more polluted waters like sewage? And I think seaweed is extremely beneficial in polluted waters. Because the pollution often form the nutrients for seaweed. Now, of course, not if that is heavy metals or oil, but what I just mentioned just before we started, in the Netherlands, we are now starting a project where we try to address the excess of nutrients in the seawater, and seaweed absorbs it. Also, if you would combine it with fish farms, there was a question like in Scotland, there are a lot of fish farms. That would be a great combination, because all the, let's say, all the shit from the fish and everything that the fish is putting out as an output, that is input for the seaweed. So it cleans the water. Actually, there are already some projects over the world, like in Australia, where you have fish farms, and before the water gets back into the ocean, it goes through a pool with seaweed, so it gets cleaned. And then it becomes a very interesting model, because you're cleaning the water and you are growing a valuable resource that you then can use for all kind of other applications. But of course, if you go to really polluted waters, like when there is heavy metals in the water, or if there has been fossil fuel pollution, then of course the seaweed might grow there, but then you might be limited in how to use it. You cannot use it for food anymore, or for animals. So maybe you can use it as biomass for energy. So that is about the ecology thing. Trying to scroll down here. Maybe there's an. So the type of pollution is relevant. Yes, in a way it is. And if you talk about ecosystem restoration, the nutrient pollution is quite a big one. I mean, we see a lot of pollution now in the form of just too much nutrients that are coming from the land, from the agriculture. Another area right now, one of the projects we are working on, at least we have sent in a big proposal there, is in Morocco. There is a big phosphate mining company, and they are putting everything into the sea, also all the excess phosphate. Now, phosphate is an input for seaweed. So what we're trying to do there is, if we can grow seaweed there and recuperate the phosphate in a way, and maybe find a way to create a regenerative business or a circular approach where the seaweed can then be used as a fertilizer again, to recuperate the phosphate.
I really like Nadia's question, because I'm also curious about it. She says, how are health or food products labeled as organic seaweed? Because I imagine you have different kind of control over your circumstances as well.
Let's see if I understand the question. So within seaweed, you can get the certifications of harvesting or growing or producing it organically. But I don't understand the question. It's like how that works, or what do you think?
Maybe Nadia, do you want to clarify?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm not aware of how the organic label works outside of land agriculture, and I've seen those products before, and I was wondering how they were monitored, because in the sea, for example, I mean, there can be pollution, as you've just explained.
Yeah, it's a very good question. What it shows is that in the world of seaweed, there's still a lot unknown also to regulation. So there are certifications like MSC and ASC for fishery, etc., and also like organic. And you're right, in the world of seaweed, there lacks the experience yet. There's not. It's just starting in a way. And you do see right now mainly that those are wild harvesters that have an organic label. So they say like, I'm picking up the seaweed by hand, that's organic. I dry it and I put it in bags and I sell it. So then you're quite quickly, you're an organic operation because you don't use anything. But for cultivation, that just doesn't exist yet, or that we are in conversation with those instantions to get several certifications. And you're right, they cannot control everything. So that will be that will come back to frequent tests of water quality, of the way you operate, how you do it, what kind of machinery you use, etc. But that's an area to be explored. Can seaweed be planted in freshwater lake like Victoria here in Kenya? And there was also another question like, do you know of other kind of sweetwater or freshwater weeds? Well, seaweeds cannot grow in freshwater. They need salt, basically. What you do see in Lake Victoria in Kenya, that is, I think if I've seen the pictures lately, that is full of other type of plants. Now for those plants, probably the same thing is valid. And I saw also another question, like what can you do with all the invasives? I think that came from the US or a question. I think the moment that seaweeds or plants can be used for, let's say, applications like plastics or fuel as biomass, and you see them as waste, because that is the big question. But if you have that as waste or invasive or too much, then we need to wait a little bit more before the technology becomes ready to treat it as biomass. But it can be done. We have done already tests that you can make biogas or fertilizer from seaweed, but also from freshwater plants or weeds. But we are not specialized in that. We focus on the sea. Let's see. The one question about ecology was like, do you need to feed the seaweed? How do you stimulate their growth? Well, we don't. The way we work with a seaweed is that we look for species and locations where the seaweed grows by nature. And if you do that, then that seaweed will grow in the speed that it normally grows there. And that depends on the species. You remember maybe from the courses that there are green and red seaweeds, and they tend to grow much faster. So you can harvest them every 1 or 2 months. The brown seaweeds, they take a year or sometimes 2 or 3 or 5 years. Now, I do know there are discussions already taking place, like if we go to, let's say, nutrient poor areas in the ocean, would it make sense to put fertilizer there? But we are not involved in those discussions, and I think that is, to me, that sounds like too much going towards the efficiency that you see on land, and how can we get the most out of the natural ecosystem rather than working in line with nature. And we tend to go for that route, so I can't answer that question. The water hyacinth, that was the one in Victoria. Thank you very much. Okay, there was a question about harvesting. Yeah, sorry that I go from this and that direction. Please bear with me.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'm following here the structure. And just for your information, we already increased the questions from 5 pages to 7 to 17 right now. So it is. What's the problem with wild harvesting? Well, wild harvesting is what I just tried to explain. You have people that live close to the shore, and they just harvest the seaweed from the rocks when it's there, or if it's low tide. If that takes place on a, let's say, traditional, sustainable way, let's say it's for the family use, then of course that can't do any harm. What we are afraid of is that now seaweed becomes more and more on the radar, and since it's very difficult to cultivate, that wild harvesting can take a peak, because people think that's easy, it's there, it's valuable, so let's scrape it, and that it becomes an unsustainable way. And that's why we are against wild harvesting, and that's why we try to promote cultivating. But of course, it's the same with fishing. If you like to fish with a rod, that's completely different than building a ship with a big net and catch all the fish out of the sea at once, as an analogy. Okay. What other questions are interesting right now? Carbon. There was quite some questions about the carbon sequestration, and I think that's a good one. Because you're all right, seaweed absorbs a lot of CO2 and carbon. But if I would use it afterwards, then of course the carbon is not fixated. And that's the reason why up till now there is no carbon program yet around seaweed. People just don't know how to certify that, how to put a number on that, how to make that like a system. But it's a pity, because I think this is something we need to solve as soon as possible, because it can really stimulate and overcome some financial barriers, as I discussed before. Although seaweed, if you would use it, probably will release the CO2 it has absorbed. Like if I eat it, then I release the CO2. There are a lot of applications where seaweed replaces fossil fuel. Like one of the applications we are very enthusiastic about right now is using seaweed extract as a growth stimulant, so as a fertilizer. If we put seaweed on crops on the land, and then I mean when I say seaweed, it's like the extract, then a couple of things happen. The sugars in the seaweed, they stimulate bacteria growth, and the soil gets richer and more aerated, and because of that plants like to grow there. But there are other plant hormones in seaweed that make the plant more stress resistant, so better dealing with drought or with too much cold. But also it really results in growing more roots and more fruit or bigger leaves. And then finally, some of the elements in seaweed avoid that certain, how do you say that? I think certain fungi can release that toxin. So seaweed as a replacement for fossil fuel-based fertilizer could become very interesting. And by doing that, the soil can absorb much more carbon. So seaweed might not have the direct effect. So if it, and CO2 might get released, but it will then result in something that will then improve the situation. Plus it replaces a fossil fuel-based traditional application. So that's why I think we need to find a way, but maybe we need to deal with carbon sequestration and carbon credits and seaweed different than, for instance, trees. Although I find the tree story very on the edge of greenwashing, because trees need to grow for 30 years, and then if they're used and burned, then bye-bye carbon. So, but that's a different discussion.
Before you go on, can I just ask clarifying questions on that? So I live in redwood country, where they say, you know, the redwoods sequester the most CO2. But then I've also heard that seaweed sequesters more if it's just left and growing and stuff. Would you agree with that?
Well, seaweed just has a very, very effective photosynthesis system. So seaweed can transform very quickly light and absorb CO2. Yeah. So in that sense, you could say it absorbs more or faster. So ideally, if you would grow huge kelp forests and absorb the CO2 and let them then sink, because we have, there is scientific study right now that if you sink it at about 1 kilometer or 1 mile depth, then it stays there. Then you can consider it being sequestrated. Now that might be very interesting, but for the short near future, that will be difficult, because right now not a lot of people will just go out, grow seaweed, and then leave it there, not using the applications. But if in the future the carbon credit price will increase, that might become a model. So definitely something that I see in the future going to happen.
Okay, but just scientifically, as people are saying that the redwoods do it more, I want to be like, well, seaweed actually.
Well, I don't think we should go into a
Yeah.
competition. I think nature, in general, nature is the best one to solve that issue. And if we can double nature, let's say grow more trees, grow more forests, more kelps in total, that will be the best solution.
Okay. And then just last quick thing, I didn't understand what you were saying about the fungi, that it releases toxins or that the seaweed helps feed the myco.
No, so in plants right now, if you go to agriculture, the farmers, they use fertilizer to grow the plants and they use pesticides. Yeah. Well, it looks like that seaweed can tackle both of those issues by offering the same benefits as a fertilizer, but also avoiding that some fungi can release their toxins and almost act as a pesticide at the same time.
You mean a fungicide?
Oh, I am not into that,
okay.
But I think I see people nodding,
animals,
so yes, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Okay, good. Just wanted to clarify. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's see.
Yeah, there's a few more things in the chat.
Yeah, let's have some interaction here. That's good. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah. Jane invites you to come to Mombasa. And
can you pick out a question, Inge?
Sorry?
Can you pick out a question that you would like to be answered here?
Well, Jane is saying that there's an ecosystem restoration camp at the coast of Mombasa. How can your company partner with us and start seaweed farming there? But maybe that's a future a plan.
I need a couple of more hands, and we need to clone ourselves. But yes, I will write it down in my agenda. I would love to go there.
Yeah, and Andy is asking about whether seaweed is similar to seagrass in its ability to sequestrate carbon by trapping organic matter and allowing it to be deposited as sediment without decomposing.
That's what happened. That's what's happening under. If you go to enough depth, then it stays there forever. Then it stays there, and then you create a kind of sediment there on the ocean's bottom. And actually, this is maybe a little sidestep. But when I talk to people about using seaweed, for instance, as a source for biofuels, I say everyone who drives a car is already using seaweed fuel. The only thing is that seaweed has been on this planet 400 million years ago. And if we can leave that there and use seaweed that comes from, let's say, the short carbon cycle, that could be interesting. But the other way around, if we leave the seaweed and we grow it and it sinks, then it will act the same way as it happened millions of years ago, and will slowly grow into it will sequester carbon. And then hopefully our children's children will leave it there and don't take it out anymore.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Okay, let's see. If there's no other question, I'll go to the list. Let's see. I think I've talked enough about the carbon trading.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few more topics
there and can help us. Please feel free to help us out. How does seaweed affect coral reefs? Yeah, that question popped by twice. Well, one of the positive effects of seaweed is that because it absorbs the CO2, or actually, to be honest, the way CO2 transforms when it's in the water, it de-acidifies the ocean, and significantly. So let's say at 1 point, or let's say a decimal or 2 decimals, there are measurements, and that is with pH, that is quite a lot. And if we can de-acidify the ocean, that will definitely have a positive effect on marine life, like coral reefs. There is a lot of proof of that, and I know that Brian von Hertzen, one of my colleagues, in the seaweed industry, is working on.
Is that then related to the ocean being a carbon sink and then the seaweed doing the opposite?
Yeah, in a way. So it takes the excess. The ocean can probably absorb much more carbon with consequence, and seaweed might counterbalance that a bit if we have many more volume than right now. So it's not about us starting a farm and that will have any effect. The oceans are vast. There's no way we will get to any, let's say, boundary within a near future. It's enormous. So also the effect is, if I have my farm in Ireland or in Morocco, I cannot say like, wow, we are, but yeah, on that local ecosystem over there, it has a positive effect. And that keeps me awake, because if I think about, oh, we need to do, I have given up that I can change the world by myself, or if I should do that, and that keeps me on my feet.
I can imagine. Nadia wants to know if there's ever like a risk for seaweed to be invasive.
That is one of the questions that we get when we start a farm, and there are two sides on that. The sea system is an open system. So what we see right now is that species that have originally came from Japan came with boats in the ballast water tanks and got released in Ireland and the Netherlands and are growing there now for 20, 30 years. And they do well. And they are called invasive because originally not from here. Oysters have also sometime been imported. So that's an interesting story. When is something invasive and when it's not? When we start farms, we only work with locally growing species. So we will not introduce a species from Chile to put that in Morocco, even if it could work there. So that's almost like a, well, it's legally not allowed, but it's also like a moral thing we are not doing. But then in other parts of the world, they are less concerned about it. So in Asia, people try to, well, genetically modify seaweed, and they are, it's funny, when you go to a seaweed conference, you see people from Europe and the US, they say like, yeah, we should legalize that and regulate that and avoid that. And then people from Asia come and they're very proud that they have grown a piece of seaweed of 8 meters long, and they have pictures where they lay next to it. Yeah. That is also a situation we have to deal with. But from a standard practice point of view, you won't introduce invasives. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, I think we could maybe move on to the other topics still.
Okay, let's see. Social. Let's tackle that for a moment. So we have built the social aspect and working with communities into our plans. And we use it in several ways. First of all, from the seaweed company, we know that the world needs speed and scale if it's about seaweed. There's a huge, let's say, opportunity if seaweed is grown. And when I say this, always without the boundaries, with nature, so that people can benefit from the applications and therewith replace fossil fuel-based applications. But we can never grow if we treat it as a traditional company, like it's ours and we grow and we put people there and managers. So I don't like that system at all. We try to do it with local communities. So one example is in India, we have started a company with a local entrepreneur. And because we have an Indian company right now, we could obtain a license to grow seaweed from the government. With this license, we are allowed to train local fishermen that are now seeing their fishing business decline and look for additional activities. With the training we give them, they can go to a bank and obtain a mini loan and start a little seaweed farm. And we train them, we explain them how it works, and we offer them as well to buy the seaweed for a certain price. So they can sell everything they want to sell themselves. And if they have left over, we take that for a certain price. The same we do in Morocco, where we work with in cooperation. And actually the same thing we'd like to do in Ireland, where we like to work with the mussel farmers communities that see also their businesses under pressure. And if we can offer them an additional activity where they can use the same skills and the boats and all that, then it becomes a win-win. And that is actually how we think about the social aspect of our business.
Yeah, it's really a great model. I think there was a question about resistance from local communities as well.
Yeah. Oh, I wrote down. Nice, good question in my preparation. What we with seaweed, as I said in the beginning, 95% of the seaweed is grown in Asia. So what we don't like to do is going to a country where seaweed is already for ages, for centuries, part of the local agriculture business, and where a lot of farmers have their living, make their living out of seaweed, and then go there as the traditional, you know, the shell of this company that knows how it works and improves everything and then takes it out. So I don't like that at all. So we leave that there and we focus on what we call white spots. So we look at regions where seaweed grows. Well, seaweed grows everywhere, but where it's currently not cultivated, like around the European coasts or the African coast or Argentina, Chile, New Zealand, Australia. So for a lot of those countries, seaweed cultivation is quite a new, relative young industry. And that is what we would like to stimulate. So not in existing, that was the reason why we're not going to Asia, because it's already there, but focus on the rest of the world. And what we see is we see growing interest there. And therefore also no objections from people, because we're actually adding activities there rather than taking over activities. Okay.
I really like the question of Gio, who says, are you planning on opening a seaweed ecosystem restoration camp? But just because you were talking about these different communities, I was thinking, oh, how would that be possible?
Yeah, that would be really great, Gio. And let me explain you a little bit how we work with the seaweed company. We can, one of our purposes or one of our goals is just to create a new story about what is possible, but we can never do this by ourselves. But we would like to, how would we say that, provide a platform or let's say a kind of, platform concept where these kind of initiatives can link to. So one of my dreams, for instance, is that someone starts an educational program around seaweed and explain and makes a whole program for kids at school to teach them already what are the benefits, what's working, can you work on a sustainable way within the boundaries of nature. Right now, we don't have the time or the focus to do that. But if someone is let's say, passionate about it, that would be great. And that's the way how we attract entrepreneurship. We met someone who wants to build material out of seaweed. She's a designer. And I said, great, let's see how we can work together. And also, Gio, if you want to start a camp, then maybe there are ways to support that without asking our focus to distract. But I think inspiration can bring already a lot and linking to each other. So I like those initiatives, and I think they are definitely badly needed.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh. Where am I? I'm at page, gee, we need to extend this session.
Yeah, let's see. Well, we can go a little.
Can I just again interject? I just want, because I'm involved in the ecosystem restoration camp movement in California, and we do have people specifically looking at trying to do one with seaweed and stuff. And so, connect you all around that as it develops more, but we are trying to see it and get divers and people really involved around the world to spread this outside of our community. It's happening slowly, but there's a lot of political resistance in California, unfortunately.
Yeah, you have a nice environment right now to start these kind of things, but again, the world is just one ecosystem, so yeah. Okay, let's see. If I scroll through the questions.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember as well what else was there about scale and about.
If you want your question being asked right now, you can just unmute yourself and go for it.
Yeah, so just about the scale thing, I was wondering, because you were saying in like the way you have your system, it's much more like machine and industrial, a way of scaling up. And you're mentioning in your presentations how like in Asia, it's much more labor intensive. So I was just curious in India or Morocco or other more developing countries that you guys are planning to work in, is that more of a possibility to have systems that are more labor focused as opposed to machine focused?
Well, that depends a little bit on two things. So one is let's say the in the end, the availability of labor that is affordable in a way. So it's I once went to China to see an example of a seaweed harvesting boat, and I thought, okay, that's cool. I want to learn from that. It was a boat with 20 people on board that were taking out the seaweed of the water. That we cannot do that in Norway or Ireland or the Netherlands, because then you need to pay 100 euros per kilogram of seaweed. So that's that part of it. But the other thing is that it depends a little bit on the species. So the brown seaweeds, they require, and it's not let's say an industry on the water. It's more that you need to find ways to let's say find a harvesting machine like a fishing boat where you can harvest the seaweed at a higher speed rather than cutting it by hand one by one. So with the brown species, we need to find ways for more automation, especially if we also go more offshore towards wind farms. The other species like green seaweeds and red seaweeds that we grow in India and Morocco, they can be grown easier closer to shore. So therewith we can more easily use labor-intense practices. And where possible, we try to do that. So I'd rather have 200 fishermen in India having their small farm and they can make a living on it, doing it as a labor-intense job, and therefore create kind of scale, than having one big automated machine or an improved growing system that doesn't need those people, but in the end only brings in then seaweed in an efficient way. So, and then the truth is probably somewhere in the middle there. So we try to see what is pragmatic and what is feasible. Yeah. Does it answer it a little bit?
Yeah.
Other questions? Shout out. It's shout out time.
Is there anyone else that has a question?
You hear me?
Yeah.
Hello.
We hear you.
I have a question about your plastics. I mean, I'm a diver too, so I'm really annoyed by plastic in the ocean. And I saw you're holding up a piece of it, like your seaweed plastics. But then I wonder, why is that not being scaled up or funded by politicians that invest in big giants like Ineos that again get funded by the Belgian government? Why don't we get those subsidized, and can we do something more to get those funds towards us?
Two answers, Steve. One, to make plastic, you need a lot of seaweed, of seaweed. It's like plastics and fuel, energy, you need a lot of seaweed. There is just not enough seaweed to start with. Second, the funny thing is, if you make plastic out of seaweed, you're using the polymer. So in the end, you're just creating a plastic. And plastic is not always biodegradable. So some people think biodegradable is great, but if you have biodegradable plastic, it only works if you put it in the soil where there is a lot of activity, bacterial activity. If you put it on the street or in the sea, that plastic will not biodegrade. It's not that it turns back into a piece of seaweed again. But then still, if we could choose between seaweed-made plastic or fossil fuel-made plastic, I am in favor of seaweed, of course. So, and there are activities and starting up right now, but it's just a matter of there is not enough. You're talking about millions of kilograms of seaweed that you would need to produce plastic in a way to replace something. And then the question is, if you have that much seaweed, don't you want to use it better to improve immune systems of people or animals or the earth, or when do you want to make plastic out of it? So that is the situation right now.
Are they not funding like new films or packaging with seaweeds?
Yeah, it's starting now. There's a cool company. It's called Notpla. It's not plastic. I think they're in the UK, and they are making plastics out of seaweed. So
maybe we should call it. We should stop calling it plastics then.
I don't know. That's not for here, but it is happening definitely. In the UK, there's a company called Oceanium. They are looking into plastics. In France, there's a company that is looking into how to make plastics, and it's relatively easy. You can, if you're in the plastic business, you need polymers, and that they are in seaweed, and you can use them and create it.
I always feel like sea lettuce just it has a texture of plastic.
Yeah, you're right. It has this, especially if it's fresh. It's like this. It looks
Oh
sometimes
God,
like a piece of plastic.
it's very chewy.
Yeah, yeah. More questions. More questions.
What do you consider to be the 3 main applications of seaweed?
Sorry, the main?
Applications.
Yeah, I remember you asked that question. I think to make that an easy answer, seaweed, the bioactive ingredients of seaweed are just fantastic to improve gut health.
Mm-hmm.
And an improved gut health results in a better immune system. Now, if you say gut health, you probably think about people first. So for humans, this is very beneficial. For animals, we see the same thing. We see that cows and pigs, they because they have an increased immune system, they need less or no antibiotics. Or cows need less food to feed them, or they give more milk. And so that is on animals. It has also improved gut health and immune system works. And then the third level is the soil. So improve the gut health of the earth, of the soil. As I just explained, how the bacteria get stimulated and we get a healthier soil. Just going back to the animals, because of course that question passed by as well. Why are you using seaweed to improve, work on animals while we're better off without animals? Yes, I fully agree there. And the thing is that although we would love to see a world where people consume less meat or no meat at all, that is not going to happen overnight. And that's the reality. So in the meantime, if we can improve the welfare by offering natural-based supplements and that can avoid and take away antibiotics, or that can take away that the tails and the ears of pigs has to be cut off because they stop biting due to our supplement, or you know what I mean, then I'd rather contribute to that. And then hopefully in the meantime we grow in awareness that what we're doing as humanity, but that's how we look at it. We cannot solve all the problems at once. That is just too much. More questions? Anything you always want to know about Milan?
I don't recall if you already mentioned it, and if you did, I'm sorry, I'm asking again. Who are your clients? Did you start just the farming and marketing strategy, or are you also part of the supply chain of your products?
Well, when we started, I noticed an interesting paradox. People said, like, yeah, there is no demand for seaweed, therefore we don't grow it. But I thought, no, it's the other way around. There is no seaweed, therefore there is no demand. And if you want to start an activity as a client, then you need a constant volume. Otherwise, if you just have 1 ton today and then a year nothing, then you cannot do something. So we are slowly but surely trying to develop those different areas. And if we do that, we don't need a lot of clients in each area. So right now we're working with a big dairy company in Ireland, and we look at, okay, how can it work for cows? We're working with farmers in the Netherlands about how to use it as a fertilizer. We are working with a company that's looking, can we make cheese out of it? So in the beginning, and then you try to work with the people that are open to do something different and that want to do it sustainable. And we find luckily more and more of those companies. When that works, then the word spreads itself quite quickly. And that's the way we try to work. But it's mainly, we work still with, let's say, business to business. So it's not that we have a web shop for people to buy a piece of, there are other people who are doing that. So we are not doing that.
Yeah, so maybe in a way it's more about networking than a like broad approach to marketing.
Yeah, what we see is that the companies that are on the forefront are always the ones that are open to start new ideas. And those are also the companies that a lot of other people look at, like what are they doing, how are they improving right now. You always see whatever industry, in retail or with with sport clothing. You have some companies that are always in the front steps, and people look at them, and if they use seaweed and think, hey, that's interesting, let's see if we can use it.
And actually, I was quite curious because you mentioned earlier that you do need to process the seaweed to turn it into food or to put it on the land.
Yeah.
So do you have how do you know how to process it, or do you have a lab, or how does that work?
That depends on the application. So when we want to use it for a food supplement, we need to dry it. So the seaweed gets dried, and then we try to do that at as low as possible temperature, so we keep all the bioactives alive. For fertilizer, we extract it, so it's like blended in small pieces, and then it puts its beneficial elements into the water, and we use the water, and then we use the solid waste for fermentation, for different application. So it depends a little bit on the application. But processing is one of the challenges that we are facing when we scale up, because seaweed is mainly water. It's 85% water. Now, you don't want to travel with water. You don't want to transport water. You don't, and if you want to dry it, you need to get out a lot of water first. So processing is challenging. That's why we're trying to look also in applications that can just use the fresh seaweed. And so if you ferment it, or if you there are certain extraction methodologies to do that. That is currently also being developed in parallel with what we are doing.
Yeah, I remember there was a question from someone about research as well.
Yeah, there is a lot of research done. I mean, you have the typical research institute in the Netherlands, it's Wageningen. In Belgium, you have Ghent University. In the UK, all over the world there are. So actually, funnily enough, seaweed is very much known in the research environment. People know what to do. There are thousands of papers what you can do with seaweed, but it's all on a lab scale, and it's all theory until it's done. So what we need right now is people who are actually doing it, using all that research, and start picking out some of those projects and start doing it. But for that, you need seaweed. Otherwise, it's still a dream. Yeah, that's a little bit the chicken and egg story we are in.
And,
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Do sea creatures benefit from seaweed farming?
Yeah, very much. Very much, Vegesa. That was you, eh? Yeah. What we see is that marine life is, seaweed farming has a big positive effect on marine life, because seaweed absorbs a lot of the nutrients, the excess nutrients. It de-acidifies the ocean. It also forms a kind of habitat, but it's also like it works with smaller creatures, with bacteria in the water. So a lot of sea life starts. So I think half a year ago, someone did a calculation that every 1,000 kilograms of seaweed has absorbed about 120 kilograms of CO2, 2 kilograms of nitrate, 0.2 kilograms of phosphate, and it has led to 10 kilograms more fish. So marine life is definitely happy with seaweed farms. Yeah.
And Camilla asked my second question: when you harvest, do you affect now the marine life? Because after they get cozy and feeling nice.
Yeah, I understand the question. So it's not that we first build a nice house and then when they're there, we take it out. If you look at fish and everything, that it's not that we take out a whole big area at once out of the water. So when we harvest it, it will be net by net or rope by rope. And then when it's harvested, there is a constant flow of water to clean off the seaweed. So everything that is on the seaweed gets immediately spooled back and brought back into the sea again. Yeah, and of course there will be definitely, there will be the accidental crab or whatever what you have there. Of course, that will happen. Yeah, but the big effect of seaweed is just during the growth cycles in spring when the seaweed is still there and fish can use it to protect themselves and lay eggs and things like that. That's why they use it for. In nature, seaweed in the summer, for instance, in Ireland and the Netherlands, will disappear anyway because the water becomes too warm, and then it starts growing again the next year. So it's more or less the same natural process there. More questions? Yeah, I know, Inge. I continue up till midnight.
Yeah, just
I know
keep
that some
going.
people go to bed in Hong Kong and all that. But
I had one more question, Joost.
yeah.
A bit more general. I was just wondering, what do you regret in your journey so far? Like, what was one of your mistakes that perhaps we can learn something from in as entrepreneur?
I remember if I look back at 2 mistakes we made, that was the moment when we became, I call it opportunistic. So when an opportunity passed by that seemed too good to be true, and where we didn't look into, okay, is this really part of our strategy? And mainly that then has to do, the opportunism has to do with money. So like, oh, well, if we do this, we can earn a lot of money quickly. Well, in both situations, it was not the case. And we started a project and we signed a contract and we spent a lot of time and energy to get out of the contract again. And in the second case, we had to fire that person. And I hate that. That had a big impact on me. But that is what we had to do. If someone doesn't fit our values, then in the long term, that will hurt you. So those are the biggest questions, apart from all the smaller things, like my operation manager didn't know the difference between a quote and an invoice, for instance. So he ordered things, and then instead of asking a quote before, he ordered it, and then afterwards he asked for the quote, and he said, well, we already have to pay this big amount, we couldn't compare. But those are small things that are not, that's just learning on the way. That is, yeah.
Yeah, so in a way, working with people and funders that you feel certain about as well.
Yeah, and luckily the mistake we didn't make was going with the wrong people from an investment point of view, because that is that I know, and we've been extremely selective there. As I said, we have turned away from almost €1 million because I didn't want to work with those people, and that is a big step if you start a company. So you can say, oh, now I have the money and we need it, but I know that will be backfire, and then it's nothing. So that is something you really need to look. Not all money is the same.
Yeah, that's good advice. I see another question from Milena on a different topic again, on Sargasso seaweed.
Yeah.
Do you know, what can you tell about it?
I know that there's a lot of that. And that's mainly due to the excess of nutrients that come from the Amazon River. So what you see, if you look at the map, there's some beautiful not the maps are beautiful, not the case that they are describing, is that you see the sargassum growing in Brazil and then moving up to the Caribbean, and huge, I like thousands of kilometers or thousands of miles. It's massive. Now that is the way we look at it, and I know some people are looking into it. Can we use this as a carbon sink? Can we complete the cycle and sink this sargassum down and therefore capture the carbon? But that is technology an interesting and difficult question, but from an ecological point of view as well, because a lot of animals live in that sargassum weed. The problem is the moment it reaches the land, then it has to be removed with fossil fuel-based tractors and all that, and it damages the soil. And one big challenge of this seaweed is it contains a lot of, what's the name? The blauwzuur.
Can't help you there.
Arsine. So that is not nice stuff. Arsenicum. And that's why you can't use it for any food or feed, or even if you want to use it for biomass, then you put a lot of this metal, this heavy metal in the earth. So this is a challenging issue right now. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
How are we all doing? If you feel free, if you are dead and tired with all those questions, feel free to follow your own program. But I'm fine to answer a couple of more questions. So go ahead.
Helen says she's leaving, and for everyone else, if you have a question, you can keep going. And there's one actually that is from Luki, and she's not here, but I'm also curious. This is more about regulations. So the areas dedicated to seaweed farming, your company controls these. And then her question is, are these coastal areas private properties that are leased or owned by the government? Could you talk about this in Ireland, right?
It's mainly that part. So basically all around the world, the sea belongs to the governments, local governments. If you stay within the marine area. That means that you need to get licenses. You get a license to use an area for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, depends on the country. And that is what you need, otherwise you cannot start up an activity. But there is competition in the coastal areas because more people want to use it, of course. So in Ireland, for instance, there is a lot of bays where and there's not a lot of traffic, so we can easily get concessions. In the Netherlands, it's impossible. The North Sea is the most traffic, has the most traffic in the world, so we cannot start a seaweed farm there. So we're looking for ways where along the coast, where you can easily start a farm without having to deal with a lot of traffic around that, because that doesn't go well together.
Then she's also asking if you need to promise a certain number of jobs or other benefits.
No, basically not. No, I know in Morocco they ask that, but in Ireland or in the Netherlands it's more like it's a license, so you have to say what you're going to do and what your plans are and what you want to put in the water and what species, and so that's some regulation, but then you are basically free to do that. Yeah. Steve had a question, no?
I have a question about the ocean currents and the oceans warming. If you base your business onto a certain area where you grow that seaweed, and then ocean currents stop or the water gets warmer, it's going to affect your whole business. Are you not afraid of that, or are you anticipating? Sorry, I do the side.
No. That is true. That might and will happen. Yeah. But I find it really difficult to anticipate to that. What we do see is that certain species start now growing in areas where they didn't grow before. So yeah, that will happen. Yeah. And luckily then since seaweed is growing all over the world, not all seaweed is growing at all the same places. So you have species that like warmer water. And maybe we get in the future tropical seaweeds around Belgium and Netherlands. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah.
We have now parrots flying through here through my house. Yeah, it's possible. It will probably happen. Yeah.
Do you sell any of your products to companies making face products and stuff?
Yeah. Seaweed is extremely good for your skin. We're actually now almost launching a skin product. And the funny story behind it is that it's not the first company who's doing that, of course. But there was a facial cream company, and someone was walking around the coast and he saw fishermen, rough guys, dealing with all the ropes and the fishing net, but they had very smooth hands, and that was because of the seaweed they were dealing with. So he thought there might be something. So the alginate in seaweed is extremely good. If you want to take a bath and you take some seaweed and you put it on your face, then it has a very good effect. And seaweed is also, the alginate is also good for wound healing, for instance. If you have a scar, you can put that on. So there's so many benefits almost.
Yeah, I've been using a red bumpy one for my face and my skin in the shower. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool.
Yeah, excellent.
That's why Joost is looking so young.
Well, I'm 75. You wouldn't say so.
You say. Yeah, in the town where I usually live in the UK, there's also a company that does a lot with seaweed, and they wild harvest most of it and make
the bladder wreck. It's called that. Yeah, that's seaweed that's there on the coast.
Yeah, yeah.
Gio, you're doing a great walk there. It's so funny to see all the trees passing by.
There's a company that manufactures.
Definitely.
Yeah, good. Sorry, what was the question?
There's a company that manufactures a trace element called Siwagen from Thailand. Do you know that? And do you work with them? Maybe selling to them products or something?
No, I don't know that. I know that there are a lot of mainly the seaweed that is used or grown in Asia and Thailand is used for extraction of agar and carrageenan. That's like a binding product. Actually, if you look in your toothpaste, if you use toothpaste, you can see agar or carrageenan. So you already brush your teeth with seaweed, actually. I don't know about the product you mentioned. No.
I saw there's a convention in summer on Sweden. Do you know of it? Would you
Where
recommend
there
it?
are many conferences.
No, it's online. It's 24, 25 around that date.
No, I know there are a lot of seaweed conferences on the continents, on all continents. There are many conferences. I'm not aware of all of them.
That's not
a lot of momentum around it then.
Yeah, there is. That's definitely happening. Over the last years, it's definitely growing a lot. So, which I think is a great case. So, I feel that we are going to a kind of an end now. Unless if you have a question, and if not, feel free. You can always reach me. What I will do right now.
Yeah, that would be good to know, actually.
There you go.
Amazing. That's really
And
kind.
feel free. I will not promise that I will answer immediately because we have a lot on our plate. But if there's any pressing question or anything you want to know or any initiative or whatever, feel free. I think, what you want and what you're doing also and why you're interested in these courses, I think that's a great step. That is what we need. We need to grow more and more and move from individuals, I think, to more a connected bunch of people. And there is just a certain tipping point needed, and that's all. And then beautiful things will happen. And I think we will still face that. And that is, I look forward to contribute to that. So I would like to thank you all very much for your questions. And as you can tell, after even more than an hour, I'm still jumping. So this is a lot of energy, which is a good sign.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
And thank you for the wonderful lesson that we've had this week. Yeah.
All right.
Amazing.
Thank you all in all the places where you are. Spread the seaweed world.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Bye, Hannah.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Good weekend, everyone.
Bye, Camilla. Bye, Laura. Bye, Peter. Bye, Steve. Bye, we just bye, Fessel. Yay.
Yay.
Bye, Meg. And bye, Bart.
Did you get them all?
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Inge.